In the year of 2021, Apple will release a movie titled Swan Song. And in this movie, the main character would discover that he has a terminal illness. After discovering that he's ill, he learns of a research facility that may be able to help him. But when he gets to this research facility, he learns that it's not the help that he was seeking. They weren't going to cure him, but rather offer a clone in his place to take his place. He debates with himself on whether or not he's going to give this a try, and he eventually succumbs to it. The idea was to place the clone in his place. That way his family won't miss him. Towards the end of the movie, he would be at war with himself on whether or not he was going to let the clone take his place. But then an event would occur that would force his hand and ultimately make the decision for him. I won't go into detail in case you do decide to see the movie, but it is interesting. We've seen these stories made over and over and over, but this one was actually different because it wasn't a horror story, but rather a love story. And instead of trying to replace what was lost, he was trying to prevent the heartbreak from occurring to begin with. When it comes to the subject of cloning, I'm usually set in my ways. I don't believe in it, and I feel like scientists are pushing that way too far. But then I come across stories like this next one, and it truly makes me think. October 25th, 2005. The world would make way for Abigail Smith. She would be born to her mother, Carol Bennett, and her father, Kenroy Smith. She would spend her first couple of years living in Jamaica with her mother and her father. However, around the year of 2007, her family would make a transition to America. Upon moving to America, a young Abigail Smith would have to leave a piece of herself behind in Jamaica. And that would come in form of her father, because her father will remain living there, although they did keep in steady contact and had a great relationship. Upon moving to the United States, her family would first be living in Highlands, New Jersey. They would stay there for a minute, but ultimately end up in Keansburg, New Jersey. By the year of 2017, Abigail Smith would be 11 years old. She would be a 5th grader attending Joseph R. Bolger Middle School. At this time in her life, Abigail was described as someone who was a ball of entertainment. She loved to sing, dance, model, and like most young girls her age, she enjoyed playing dress up. But the greatest talent that she possessed of them all was the ability to put a smile on everyone's face. The young and charismatic Abigail Smith at a young age already had dreams of what she wanted to be when she was older. And when she wasn't busy placing a smile on everyone's face around her, she was working toward those goals. July 12th, 2017. It was the summertime, so on this day, no school for Abigail. She would spend it like she spent most of her summer days. She would normally hang out with her friends and play with them, and when she wasn't with them, she was at the house. Well, on this day, 8 p.m. rolls around, and Abigail doesn't return home that day. Abigail Smith not returning home at a reasonable time was something that her mother didn't allow. So when 8 p.m. rolls around and she's not home, the mother immediately suspects that something is wrong. The mother would begin with searching the vicinity, and after that doesn't turn up anything, she begins to make calls to her friend's parents. But nothing turns up. And then she really begins to worry. At this time, Abigail Smith would be staying in Hancock Arms Apartments located in Keansburg, New Jersey. Here she would live with her mother and also her brother, but her brother doesn't know where she's at either. So in this case, the mother does the only thing that she can do, and that's to contact the authorities and report her daughter missing. After receiving the news that 11-year-old Abigail didn't return home, the police immediately head to her apartment complex in search of clues. So they began talking to neighbors and anyone in the immediate area. When the police concluded their interviews, they didn't come up with any clues to her whereabouts. In fact, while conducting interviews, they asked people to consent to their homes being searched, just to rule them out. And every home that they searched showed no sign of Abigail. The night hours slowly begin to tick away, and Abigail doesn't return home. Her mother's anxiety is growing at this point, and the only thing that would help ease it would be to see her daughter walk through the door. But time continues to elapse, and she never comes. Although the police did not find any leads to her whereabouts, they stayed up all night vigorously working this case and still conducting interviews. And around 4:30 a.m. of July 13th, they would receive their first big break. A neighbor would come forward and relay some information. This neighbor would testify that they witnessed Abigail Smith going into an apartment unit on July 12th of 2017. And they knew exactly which unit it was. The unit number was 16A. And upon going to this unit, the police would quickly discover that this unit was directly above where Abigail lived. Upon hearing this unit number, the police immediately grew suspicious, because that's a unit that they had recently visited. In fact, they had spoken to a 20-year-old male who lived there, who goes by the name of Andreas Erazo. Andreas's home was in fact one of the units that was searched during the first search for Abigail. They went into his apartment, they searched it, they found no signs of Abigail, and they left. But now that they are armed with this new information, the police would return to his unit at 5 a.m. in the morning, and they would wake him up out of his sleep and tell him that he needs to come down to the station for an interview. And Andreas agrees. He would ride down to the police station for this interview. Upon entering the room, the police would ask him, does he want anything to eat or drink? He declines. They then ask him, are you willing to speak with us without a lawyer present? And he agrees to that also. So they begin to question him about Abigail once more. But he maintains that he doesn't know where she's at, and whatever happened to her, he's innocent in this situation. So this interview would be conducted, and it would last for 1.5 hours. But although Andreas didn't offer up any information to her whereabouts, the police had a funny feeling about this guy, and armed with the information that her last seen appearance was at his apartment, they had enough to detain him. So around 6:30 a.m., Andreas would be moved to a different interview room. But the circumstances were different this time. During his first interview, he was being questioned for potential leads, but this time he was being looked at as a suspect. After moving Andreas to another interview room, they don't immediately interview him again. He sits there. They decide to return to his apartment once again, armed with a warrant for a search. So they search his property again, but it doesn't turn up anything. The apartment is completely clean of any trace of Abigail. After searching his apartment once more, they would double back and search the entire vicinity again, looking for any new clues. And that's when, around 10:30 a.m., police would discover an abnormal object on the roof of the apartment complex. So the authorities would make their way to the roof for further inspection. And upon observing the object, they realized it wasn't an object at all. The police would discover the body of a young female wrapped in a sheet and bound with computer cords. This body would in fact later be identified as 11-year-old Abigail Smith. But to make this situation even more suspicious for Andreas, her body would be discovered on the roof directly adjacent to his window.
Maurice, tonight this community has been hit very hard by this tragedy, and earlier this evening people from all over Keansburg gathered here to show their support for the family of Abigail Smith. Behind me you can see where they left candles and stuffed animals and balloons in her memory. Just beyond that memorial, the investigation into what happened continues. Keansburg residents gathered together Thursday night in song and prayer.
For memory of the little girl, for Abby, memory of Abby.
Stunned by the news that 11-year-old Abigail Smith was found murdered behind her home.
It's scary, it's frightening, and it's just unbelievable that it has happened right here in our backyard.
Smith was first reported missing by her mother around 9 Wednesday night, last seen at the Hancock Street Apartments. Police made the heartbreaking discovery Thursday morning.
Young Abigail Smith's remains was recovered around 10:45 this morning in the back area of the apartment complex behind me where she lived.
Neighbors say Smith often played outside but never strayed far from her door. She used to run around the building?
Yeah, she got, I guess, tired and bored and run up and down the entire stairs.
Investigators spent the day combing through the entire complex for evidence, and at one point, bloodhounds were brought out to search the nearby Henry Hudson Trail. Police say Smith's family is not suspected in her death, but it could have been someone she knew. Police believe this is an isolated incident, but the community says that brings them little comfort.
In fear, since, we don't know who did this, and I hope to God that they catch the person who did it.
Police say the medical examiner will determine how Abigail Smith, how she died. Police have not named any suspects in this case, and they have not made any arrests. Reporting live in Keansburg, Valerie Castro, CBS 2 News.
All right.
Now that the authorities have discovered her body, they return to the interview room to question him once again. And he maintains that he's innocent and he has nothing to do with it. But they weren't about to let him walk out of that interview room that quickly. So they continued to press the issue, in which afterwards he breaks. He says that on July 12th of 2017 at approximately 8 p.m. he thought an intruder had entered his home. He then says he goes to the kitchen and he retrieves a knife in order to defend himself. He then tells the authorities that before he could even recognize that it was his downstairs neighbor, he attacked and accidentally killed Abigail.
Do you tie her at the knees or at the legs or at the feet? At the ankle? Alright, so now her wrists are bound together. Her ankles are bound what, to each other? Alright, so now, and you managed to get her knees up to make her cradle?
Wrist to wrist, ankle to ankle, and then put the two together.
Alright, so, and then just demonstrate for me one more time. So her hands are over her knees. Let me see it again, please.
Their knees are up.
Can you do it?
They're more up like this towards her body. And then...
And her hands are still together?
So this is wrapped.
Yeah.
And she's on her back.
Yeah.
At this point now. So I tied the wrist first and then the ankle.
It's at this moment that the authorities realize he's setting up a plea for self-defense. But they already knew that it was far from it, because although he did confess to what happened to Abigail, he wasn't telling the whole story, because when Abigail Smith was found, her body was found without clothing. The police then questioned him about that situation, and he denies violating her. In fact, he says after he attacked, he blacked out, and he doesn't remember what exactly happened afterwards. The police would try and press him on the issue further, but he wasn't budging from their stance, and this would conclude the interview. He would then be transported down to the local jail, but not before obtaining a DNA sample for further analysis. And after completing the interview with Andreas, the authorities would be forced to deliver the bad news to the family. After learning of the devastating event, the family would make preparations for the funeral. But to add insult to injury, the father and sister of Abigail Smith, who lived in Jamaica, would be denied visas for her funeral, and they would be forced to mourn the loss of their loved one from a distance. Although Andreas Erazo would be arrested on July 13th of 2017, him and his lawyer would be using tactics to delay the trial. At this time, him and his attorney would be looking for any and everything to substantiate his claim that this was self-defense, until they receive the discovery. And in the files were located damning evidence. The sheets she was found wrapped in, as well as the computer cords, would be directly traced back to his residence, and his DNA would come back as a match as well, and the police would conclude she was violated. Upon learning what the prosecutors had in store for him in court, he would decide to take a plea deal instead, and on May 31st of 2019, he would receive his sentence. He would ultimately be sentenced to life for murder, plus 50 years.
Andreas Erazo sat emotionless as the sentence was read. Abigail Smith's mother today addressing Erazo directly, saying her daughter didn't deserve to die this way.
Abigail Smith not only looked exactly like her mother, I'm told she had her mother's kind heart. But of course, as we know, her mother's heart will never be the same. She was stoic in court today as she said her piece to the man who killed her baby girl.
As a mother, the pain will never leave me. I said this earlier and I am saying this again. I am haunted by recurring nightmares of the horror that my baby suffered at your aunt, Andreas Erazo.
Carol Bennett and her sister Cecile's backs are to us as they face the man who killed their princess, Abigail. Her whole family calls the 11-year-old murdered nearly 2 years ago.
Andreas Erazo haven't shown any remorse, sympathy, or empathy.
20-year-old Andreas Erazo never once looked at the loved ones who told the court how they miss Abigail every day.
I stand here to intercede on her behalf. I believe that there is no punishment suitable for Andreas Erazo.
The judge accepting a plea deal that spares this family a trial. Andreas Erazo is sent to prison.
For the remainder of your natural life.
You killed my daughter. I hope you rot in jail. My one and only daughter. You took away from me. You need to rot in jail. You can't even look at us.
Because the girls are there, there's just 2 girls and 1 girl. Then it didn't make it awkward. I don't know about today, but it might be awkward.
Why am I going to be awkward?
Because if mom doesn't come today, and then I have to sit at a table with boys again, it's going to be awkward. Just awkward. Especially since if Sierra doesn't come today, then it'll just be me. And I don't know if he's coming today. That's why it might be awkward.
Yeah.
You videoing me?
No.
Anything else? Bye. Bye.
No.
When it comes to the senseless act that happened to 11-year-old Abigail Smith, it leaves me speechless. Because Andreas Erazo decided to take a plea deal instead of taking it to court, a lot of details were left out. When the autopsy was concluded, the medical examiner would make notation that she died due to a fatal stab wound. The community and her family will forever mourn her loss. She lost her life at only 11 years old, before she had even begun to live. A motive was never explained in this case, although due to the circumstances and details, we could only imagine that it was to keep her quiet and to keep her from testifying to what he did to her. Rest in peace, Abigail Smith. Thank you for being a light for others.
Farewell. Thou art too dear for my possessing, and like enough thou knowest thy estimate. The charter of thy worth gives thee releasing. My bonds in thee are all determinate. For how do I hold thee but by thy granting? And for that riches, where is my deserving? The cause of this fair gift in me is wanting, and so my patent back again is swerving. Thyself thou gavest, thine own worth then not knowing, or me, to whom thou gavest it, else mistaking. So thy great gift, upon misprision growing, comes home again on better judgment making. Thus have I had thee, as a dream doth flatter, in sleep a king, but waking no such matter.